Hi, my name is Bree, and I'm going to walk you through our critical reading strategies for the SAT and the ACT. In the SAT workbook, this is pages 19 through 28. So go ahead and turn to those pages and just follow along with what I'm doing here. This is our two-track mind strategy, and it is the very first strategy that students learn that's academic. So they've already gotten to know your personality in the introduction and in the test zones parts of the class. And now they're actually getting to see you as a teacher. So this is your first opportunity to prove to them that you are, in fact, an SAT expert and that they're in good hands for the rest of the summer. They're good to go. So today we're going to walk through the two-track mind. We'll walk through Take Care. And for each page, I'll tell you what I would do and model any appropriate parts. And then at the end, we'll sort of wrap it all up. And the goal for this is by the end of this video, you should feel comfortable teaching the two-track mind and the Take Care strategies to your students. So this first page talks about what SAT questions and what the critical reading sections are really all about. And this text is all that's on the page. It's big and it looks different than a lot of our other pages do. And a lot of instructors will see that as a reason to skip over this page and just not even talk about it. You'll have students look at it for a second, but there's not a lot of meat to it. And that's a huge mistake. This page, because it has big text, it's telling you it's important. It's telling you it's something that you need to stop and make sure that your students understand. So this says the SAT critical reading section is not about choosing the right answer. It is about eliminating wrong answers. And I'll always read that aloud. I'll have students read it aloud, getting louder and louder. I might have one student read it, I might have everyone read it, depending on the class. And then we'll talk about what that actually means. And this is a great time where you can call on students' prior testing experience. Those students who have seen SAT practice tests, those students who have seen the actual test, and say, what did you notice about the critical reading questions? And a lot of times what students will say is that they were confusing, and that is absolutely true. The SAT critical reading section is written in a way to trick students, to throw some distractors out there that make them think they're getting the right answer, but really they're not, because they're not actually analyzing the passage. And so what we want to make sure that students are doing is not searching for the right answer. And this is an overarching theme throughout the curriculum, which is why this is so important, and this is such an important page. So I always have students circle it. Their circles will probably look prettier than mine does right there. But I'll have them circle that it's about eliminating wrong answers. And this is where I introduce what we call the LSA. And I will make students write this down. So LSA, yep, that's an S, stands for the least sucky answer, or the least sketchy answer. The least, it has to be a positive S, but the least sucky answer. And what that means is that every single answer choice for the SAT critical reading section will be not great. They're all going to suck. They're not going to be the answers that students would ideally pick, and it's that way for a reason. It's that way because the test writers do not want the students to do well. So when we talk to them about this, we talk about if every answer is bad, you need to find the one that is the best of the worst. So you're not looking for an answer that's good. You're looking for an answer that works in this situation. And the way that you do that is you eliminate the answers that don't make any sense. So you eliminate the craziness. Cut that craziness out of your life. Once you've eliminated those answer choices, one of the ones that's left has to be correct. And so you're choosing from a much more narrow field. And this helps students stay focused. And a lot of times it'll be stressful for them when they don't see the answer that they would put. And so just acknowledging that that's okay, and that that's a common thing that happens, and that when we're thinking about these questions, we're not looking for the right answer. We're looking for the best of the worst, or we're looking for the least sucky answer. Will help encourage your students to eliminate answer choices that don't make any sense and improve their odds of getting the questions right overall. So take at least 3 to 5 minutes on this page, really talking to students about what it means to them and how that will apply to their test-taking experience moving forward. This next page talks about the two-track mind, and there is a lot of information on this page. One thing that I'll stress before I sort of talk you through how I would do it is I will stress that you should not be reading every single thing on this page. Absolutely not. You should be identifying key points, having students add to it where necessary, and sort of skimming the rest. All of your students are able to read, so sitting and having you read the whole thing aloud, or having every single person in the room read one piece of information so you've read through the whole page, isn't worth it, and it's not going to be a good use of your time. So, when I'm teaching this page, a couple things that I want you to look for. Look for what I talk about, look for what I skip, and also look for what I've added to the page. So what I see on the page, what I add to the page, and what I don't really talk about or what I sort of gloss over. So when I'm teaching this page to my students, I usually start with having a student read what these things are. So when we're thinking about the critical reading section of the SAT, thinking about critical reading passages you've seen in either the diagnostic exam or some previous exams, what are some bad things? Student 1, what's something bad about the SAT critical reading? Yeah, the passages are long. Absolutely. They seem like they go on forever. They're long. Okay? Student 2, what else? Yeah, absolutely. They're boring. Look, that's even on your page. Go ahead and underline that on your page right now. The passages are boring. And it also says that the passages are dense. What might that mean? Yeah, exactly. It means that they're full of information that we don't really care about. They're packed full of information, and they're packed full of boring information, and it's never going to be something you want to read about. You'll never read about the NBA playoffs. You'll never read about the meteoric downfall of Lindsay Lohan's career. You're never going to read about anything fun. It will always be an incredibly dry story about like the history of wheat germ or something like that. It says that there's good news, and some of you might disagree. Some of you might think that there is nothing good about the SAT critical reading, but I'm going to disagree with you for a second. So let's go through these bullet points. Student number 4, could you read that first bullet point for me, please? Great, thank you. So we said they were long. It says that they're short. Why might that discrepancy happen? Yeah, okay, because we're thinking they're long because they feel like they take forever to read, but in reality they're pretty short. In reality, the longest passage you'll see is about a page. What about the second one? It's an open book test. The second bullet point says it's an open book test. What does that mean? Exactly, yeah. You don't have to memorize information. You don't have to memorize facts. And so next to it's an open book test, I want you to write not facts. Because a lot of times when we read, we end up looking for like dates, and we look for times, and we look for people's names, because that's what we're usually tested on in school. But for the SAT, they're not going to ask you that information. Why not? Why aren't they going to ask you about what year soybeans were introduced to the United States? Yeah, because it's too easy. That's exactly right. They're not going to ask you about dates or about times or about people because those questions are really easy. Everyone would get those right. That also ties in with this third bullet point. You don't have to memorize specific facts, okay? And this last bullet point says you only have to read the passage once if you read it the right way. Now, I know someone over there told me that when they did their passage-based reading, they went to the questions first. And they went to the questions, and then they went back to the passage. And then they went to the questions and went back to the passage. Can you raise your hand if you did that? Okay, great. So that's a strategy that's been around for a long time. That's a strategy that's been around since I took the SAT back before the writing section was even introduced, so a while ago. And the issue with that strategy is that it's not an open book test. So the questions that they ask you are not necessarily going to be questions that you can answer by just reading the line references in the question. So what ends up happening is you read the question and you go back to the passage, and you read the question and you go to the passage, and you keep going back and forth. you end up reading pretty much the whole passage anyway. But most of the questions will ask you about tone, or about author's purpose, or about character development, or about how one passage compares to the other passage. Would this author agree or disagree with this sentence? And so all of these questions require context. And if you are just reading a portion of the text that's pointed to in the question, you're not going to know the context. And a lot of times, it might be a little bit quicker to do that. It'll be quicker to go to the questions and go back to the passage. But your accuracy goes way down because you don't have the overall tone or feeling of the piece. You just have that one little fact that you're looking at, that one line reference. And so you won't be as accurate. You'll probably be able to answer about half the questions correctly that way, but you won't be able to answer all of them. There's no way to maintain the right level of accuracy if you're just bouncing back and forth like that. So I'm going to ask you guys from here on out that you make sure that you read the passage. This sentence, you only have to read the passage once. That's them being nice. I want you all to underline, you have to read the passage. You absolutely have to read the passage. This right way that they're talking about sort of leads down into the two-track mind. So the right way we call the two-track mind. And you might do this already, but it's something that I want you all practicing on the SAT as well. And what that is when you're reading, who in this room has ever read something and then had no idea what they read, either a page or a paragraph or a whole book? I remember in high school I couldn't tell you what the Scarlet Letter is about, and I feel really sorry to my English teacher, but I just couldn't. I read that whole book and had no idea. I didn't retain anything. And the reason for that is your brain, your eyes moving across the page is one part of your brain. But your brain also has to process what your eyes are seeing. And visual processing is a huge part of your brain. It takes up about 60 to 70% of your active brain at any given time. So you're used to seeing things all the time that you have no idea you saw. None. No idea whatsoever. Because that information wasn't made relevant to you. It wasn't made important. And so what you have to do is you have to force your brain to match up. And you have to force what you're thinking about to match up with the movement of your eyes. And what that means, what this whole box down here means, the make the two tracks of your mind work together, is it means you have to ask questions. And I want everyone to write that down right now. Not our questions. Ask questions. Oh my goodness. There we go. Ask questions. You have to ask yourself questions about what you're reading when you are reading it. Because we just talked about how boring these passages are. We just talked about how dense they are. And if you do not constantly ask yourself, what am I reading? Why is this important? What's going on? Then you are not going to be paying attention to what your eyes are doing. Instead, you're going to be paying attention to the person next to you, or the hum of the radiator in the background, or what you should have eaten for lunch yesterday and what you plan on eating for lunch today. Trust me, I've been there. I've thought all those things, probably all at once. So, you want to make sure that you are asking questions actively about what you're reading. This will force you to pay attention and force you to get down to the questions more quickly so you can be accurate when you get to the questions. Because if you do this, if you ask questions and pay attention to the passage, you'll be able to answer those context questions that you're not able to answer when you're just browsing through and going back and forth and back and forth. Down at the bottom of the page here, it talks about the sample two-track mind questions, and you all can sort of browse through those. What they all sort of boil down to is so what? All these questions are going to be asking you, why did they say this? What would the author think? Why did the author talk about this? It's going to be asking you, so what? Why do I care about this? And so that's what I want your brain to be asking. It's a lot for me to remember, for you to ask these specific questions. It's good for you to know that they're there, but it's a lot for me to ask for you to remember all of these and ask all of these questions as you're moving through the passage. What I really want you asking yourself is, why do I care? Why is this important? If something was important, make a note to yourself, write it down. If something wasn't important, if you didn't learn anything new about the author, if the tone didn't shift, if it doesn't lead you to believe that the author thinks one thing over another, you don't need to write anything down for it. But for every sentence that advanced your knowledge of the main idea, of the tone, or of the author, or a character in the story in some way, you need to make sure you are writing a note to yourself and forcing yourself to remember the answer to those questions. So when you get to the questions, they're a piece of cake, and we go through them really quickly. All right, so that's how I would sort of go through this page as a whole. One thing I want to make sure that you all are doing with your students is make them right. Make them right, make them right, make them right. They need to be adding to the page. Students can listen to you and smile and nod, but that doesn't mean that they're actually retaining anything that you're saying. So when I write something down, I expect students to write it. They don't know that because they're not psychic, so I have to tell them to write things down when I want them written down. If I want them to underline something, I need to tell them to underline it, and students will respond really well to that, but make sure that they're marking up this page that in a way so that if you weren't there, if you weren't in the room with them anymore, they could look at this and say, oh yeah, I remember what I'm supposed to do on the two-track mind. They'd remember all the relevant facts, and they'd be able to replicate this without you standing there over them. I don't know why there's a line through it. Ignore that. Okay. This page also has a lot of words on it. Less words than the page before. There's no stick face, smiley face, man. But there's still a lot of words on here. This is a page that I would absolutely gloss over until we get to the questions. So what I'll do is I will have students box around this strategy. So I will have them take their highlighters and highlight around the strategy at the bottom and say, this is what we're going to be doing after we read the passage. First, I want to practice us using our two-track mind, and then we'll come back to this. This information at the top of the page is important for them to know, but at this point you want them really excited about practicing the strategy. So I wouldn't take the time to get bogged down in having everyone read this. That's not going to be a good use of your time. I would tell students, you know, this information at the top of the page tells you what you can expect from the critical reading section. It's there for you. We're not going to go over it. If you have questions, let me know. It's all pretty straightforward, and students don't typically have questions, but just sort of telling them why you're glossing over it so that they don't get stressed and think you're skipping things and you're a wild card and doing all this crazy stuff. It'll help to improve the flow of the class if you don't stop and pause and talk about those things. So what I'll do on this page is I'll have students sort of box around with the strategy for the questions and let them know that we're going to come back to it after we practice the two-track mind. So on this next page is going to involve a lot of me mimicking students talking. So ignore me sounding crazy. But I really want you to hear how I ask students to read and what types of questions that I ask of them. Also what I'm writing on this page. So this is the first passage example that they see. And we want students actively writing throughout this page should be covered in annotations by the time that they're done. I personally require that students write in addition to underline, at least the first time we're doing this. And the reason is, just like I've read a whole book without knowing what happened, I have also underlined an entire article or highlighted an entire article, having no idea what I read. It's very easy for my eyes to move and my hand to move and for my brain to have no idea what's happening. And so what I tell students the first time we're doing this, for everything they underline or everything they circle, they should have a 1 or 2 word description off to the side of why they did that. And everyone's page should look different. Okay, so this is our first critical reading passage. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take our two-track mind, we're going to take the eyes and the brain, and we're going to force them together. And we're going to force them together by asking, so what? So the first thing I want is I need to make sure that we are reading the excerpt at the top. This is still part of the passage. I know it's italic and it doesn't look as nice as the other text. This is important. So, student 1, will you read the excerpt for me? Great. Okay, so what's some important information we got from that excerpt? Absolutely, that it's an African American scholar. So I am going to underline African American scholar. I want everyone else to underline that as well. But remember, if we're underlining, there has to be a reason why. So why might the African American scholar be important? Yep, because it's in the 20s and 30s in Oklahoma. So we think it might have to do with race. Okay, Oklahoma's in the South. What with race might we be referring to? Absolutely, segregation or racism. Okay, so every single person should have these words underlined and that word written off to the side. So, as we're moving through the paragraph, everyone's annotations can be different, but every single time you hear or read something important, I want you to underline it or just write off to the side why you think that's important. And I'm going to ask you all not what that meant, but what you wrote. So I want you to very explicitly tell me what your page looks like, and we're going to compile that for the group. So, student 3, will you go ahead and read the first sentence for me, please? Okay, great. So what did you write? Okay, so you underlined 11th birthday and you wrote to the side young. Okay. Did anyone have something different? Yeah, what'd you have? Okay, so you wrote 11 years old off to the side, you didn't underline. That's perfect. That's fine. Okay, great. So the point of that sentence was to tell us that he arrived in Tulsa when he was young. That also means he's not from Tulsa. Okay. All right, will you read the next sentence, please? Great, thank you. So what did you write? Okay, so you underlined inexperienced eyes, and you had an arrow up to young. Okay, so I'm going to take young, and I'm going to draw my arrow down just because of how my page is laid out. Absolutely. Largest city in the country. Good. So what did you do for largest city in the country? Interesting. Okay, so you thought that meant he moved from the farm or some rural setting, right? So he moved from the farm to the city. Okay. And so you wrote that off to the side. Did you underline anything? Okay, awesome. So farm to the city. All right, will you read the next sentence, student 3, please? Interesting. Okay, so student 10, what did you write? You circled racial segregation. Okay. You circled, why'd you circle it instead of underline it? It doesn't matter, it's just why? Okay, because you thought it was more important than an underline. Awesome. So this, you think, might be a theme throughout the rest of the passage. Perfect. Okay, so racial segregation was virtually complete, and we circled racial segregation. Did anyone have anything different, or are we all in sort of the same vein of this? Okay, awesome, perfect. Student 1, will you read the next sentence? All right, there's a lot of information in this sentence. So, student 5, what did you write? You underlined biggest and best, okay? And you wrote high school next to it. Okay, awesome. And student 7, did you have anything different, anything else? Okay, so you wrote unequal because of the new high school, right? So he thought his high school was good, and then there's this other one for the white students. And we're about to find out what that's like. Great. All right, student 4, will you read the next sentence? Okay, awesome. What'd you write? Okay, so you put an arrow to not equal, right? It's a big structure. So this just tells us more about the White High School. Great. So the next sentence, I was later to learn that it had every conceivable facility, such as a pipe organ and a theater-sized stage, which we did not have. All right, what did we learn in this sentence? What did we write? Student 2. Great, yeah, so this is more unequal. What did you write, student 2? Okay, so you wrote out that it had nicer things. Is that sort of the gist of what you're saying? Okay, that's awesome. Remember though, you don't want to write out a lot. You just want to make sure that you're writing a little bit to get the gist. You don't want to spend most of your time writing. So as long as you can write that quickly, that's fine. Just make sure you're not spending time re-explaining what already happened. Alright, this next sentence. I also learned that it offered foreign languages and calculus, where our school offered automobile mechanics, home economics, typing, and shorthand. Alright, student 1, what'd you write? Good. Okay. So, yeah, they seem to be smarter classes. Is that what you said? Okay, so smarter. White collar versus blue collar. That's a great way to say it. So yeah, the smarter classes, and then they're the more technical classes, or white collar, blue collar. But yeah, there's definitely a disparity in the curriculum. So however you want to write that down, do that. All right, student 6, will you read this next sentence, please? Okay, so this, you guys, this is super important because they've introduced a new character or a new set of characters. So I personally have underlined principal and teachers. And what did we learn about the principal and teachers? Okay, so they worked hard, right? So I am writing off to the side that the teachers and principals, the principal and teachers are good. They get a happy face. They are doing something right. So however you want to write to summarize that, that's fine. Just make sure you have something written about the principals and teachers. Every single time a new character is introduced, you need to make sure you have something written down. Okay. So now we're going to pause. We've asked our questions at the sentence level, and now we're going to ask as the paragraph as a whole. So I want everyone to take maybe 30 seconds and write a 5-word summary of this entire paragraph. It doesn't need to be a sentence, but 5 words about this paragraph as a whole. So if it asks questions about what this paragraph means, you're set. Okay, so what'd you write? Okay, separate and unequal high schools. Great. That sort of sums it up. Did someone have anything different? Yeah. Okay. White school better than blacks. Fine. Perfect. As long as we have something written down that's a summary. Alright, I'm not going to keep going through every single paragraph like that with you guys because you all know how to read. But I'm going to annotate on this page where I would stop and have students explain to me what they had written down. So I would stop after that sentence, after those 2 sentences, and then at that paragraph level. One thing to keep in mind and to remind students of for this sentence in particular is, paragraph in particular, I'm sorry, is to make sure that they aren't looking at the student names, or at the writer names and the author names, and writers and authors are the same, and the musicians' names. Make sure that they're focusing on, in general, what that means, not on those specific authors, because a lot of students are trained to look for those specific facts. And remember, it's an open book test. They don't need to know those specific facts. Okay, so I would stop after those sentences, I would stop after that last sentence and after the paragraph as a whole. For this next paragraph, I would stop after the first sentence, after the second sentence, after that third sentence, after that sentence. And so in this paragraph, I would stop after every single sentence because this paragraph is really meaty and it gives us a lot of information about sort of the conflict of the story. And then for these last couple paragraphs, I'd stop after the first sentence. I always stop after the topic sentence. And then I would stop after the paragraph as a whole because, again, these last sentences are a lot of people and events. And then for this last paragraph, I would stop after this first sentence, and then I'd stop after the second sentence in the paragraph. And remember that you're asking students to summarize, to write what, or tell you what they wrote every time you stop. You're asking them to summarize each paragraph, and then at the very end, you're asking them to summarize the piece altogether and write down a summary. Summarizing is a difficult skill, so I like to limit the amount of words that students have so they can't sit there and write a paragraph-long summary of what it was about. So I will have students, for the passage, they're allowed 10 words, and they are allowed to, in 10 words, summarize this entire passage because that will get to the heart of the main idea. And that's sort of how I walk through the entire passage. It is important to be mindful that different students will be at different levels for this. And while it might seem easy and straightforward to you, for struggling readers who get caught on vocabulary, or for even people who don't like to read, this can be a long and sort of arduous process. So make sure that you're encouraging them as you go throughout it. Make sure that you're mindful of reminding them to write and not letting them get lax about that, and reminding them of why they're doing this. They're doing this for accuracy, and they're doing this so they can get to the questions and feel comfortable answering the questions right away. Okay. This next page is a sample summary. It's a sample annotated page. I never have students look at it until after they've annotated their own because otherwise they tend to want to replicate it. So this is a page that you can have them compare their annotations to the annotations of others. This can be a page where they can just see different ways to annotate. I don't spend a lot of time on this page because we've already gone through the annotations on our own, but it's good for them to be able to see a cross-reference for when they're reviewing later. All right, now we're getting to answering the questions, which is that strategy that I skipped a little bit ago and I promised that we would come back to. And this is the take care strategy, and we use this for all of our critical reading questions, so for both sentence completions and for passage-based reading. And this acronym is really to remind students actively what they should be doing when they're answering the questions. So they've gone through with the two-track mind, they've read the passages, they've annotated, they've summarized, they've done all of that work, and now they're getting to the questions. And they need to be able to answer the questions accurately. And the first piece was, getting to know what the passage is talking about, getting to the meat of it. But now we're talking about making sure that we're finding that least sucky answer and that we're eliminating the answer choices that don't make any sense. So this is a page that I'll always reference back to that first page where we talked about eliminating the wrong answers to find the least sucky answer. That's our main goal for this whole question answering strategy, is to eliminate the sucky answers. And so for this page, I will have students read out each of these strategies. So I'll have them read out cover, anticipate, reveal, and eliminate. I'll call in different students to read each one. And then I'll call in another student to tell me why we might do that. So after a student reads cover for me, I'll call in someone else and say, why would I ask you to cover the answer choices? And the reason I have them cover the answer choices, and the reason you have them cover the answer choices, and we all have them cover the answer choices, is because they are going to be tempted by obvious wrong answers if they look at them. You'll have students who say, well, I can't write if I'm covering. Well, they can cover with their other hand, they can cover with their calculator, they can cover with their answer sheet, they can cover with whatever. But it's important for them to cover up their answer choices so that they aren't tempted to cheat. They're not tempted by the sucky answers. And I'll have them write a justification on the page. So again, I would make sure that they're writing this down. Okay. And again, I'll have a student read anticipate, and then I'll ask them why they think that we're anticipating. And we're anticipating so that we know what type of answer that we're looking for. So we are anticipating what the answer is going to be so that we know what the LSA will likely look like. And I know that's a lot of L's and a lot of likes, but just go with it. So if they anticipate the answer choice before they look at the other answer choices, then they'll know what type of answer they're looking for, and it makes eliminating really easy. The next step's reveal, and in the reveal step, they just honestly pick up their hand and they uncover the answer choices. This is where they are Vanna. And when I ask students why we reveal, the answer is so you know what the answer choices look like. It's pretty straightforward. And then finally we eliminate. And when they're eliminating, I want to make sure that they're actively crossing them out, not just doing a dot to the side or remembering that they don't want A. I want them actively crossing out those answers so they're never tempted by them again. Actively cross things out. And they eliminate, and we remind them that they eliminate so they can find the LSA. Again, LSA, not LSAT. All right. So the question types go through what types of questions students will see. And I go around the room and ask students to tell me what a big picture question might look like and have them fill in the box. What a detail question might look like and fill in the box. And what a vocabulary and context question might look like and fill in the box. So this is where, in this whole area, these are student definitions. So this is where students provide okay, that says definitions, just trust me. So this is where students are providing what these questions mean. So big picture questions are usually main idea and tone questions. Detail questions will ask about a specific line reference. And vocabulary and context questions will be, what does this word mean in this passage? Anticipate is really, really important, and we went over it up here, but this is something that I'll have students read, and I'll have a couple students read it and remind them that anticipate is the most important, one of the most important steps. Obviously, eliminating is also really important, but anticipating so that you find an answer that you're matching up with is incredibly important. Alright, so now we're going to look at a couple of questions, and we're just going to go through the first two. So when I teach this, I have students cover their answers. I'm like, remember, first step is to cover your answers. And sometimes they forget, sometimes they'll slam it down loud, and I like to encourage that at first. But make sure that before you move on, absolutely every single student has their answer choices covered. Next, I'll pause and have every single person anticipate their answer and write their anticipation down. So right now I want everyone to read question 10 and write down your anticipation. So go back to your passage if you need to, but how does the author describe his high school? Good. He describes it as the biggest and the best. So I'm going to write that anticipation on the board. Alright, perfect. So he describes his high school as the biggest and the best. So we've covered, we've anticipated, we're going to reveal. So Vanna White, move your hand. And now we're going to eliminate, my favorite thing. So this first answer choice A, Does initial excitement make sense with our anticipation of biggest and best? Okay, excellent. So if it does make sense, we're going to leave it. All right, what about B, guarded optimism? What do we think? Yeah, student 3. Yeah, we don't know for sure. This guarded part's a little bit weird, right? It doesn't, okay, we want to eliminate it? Awesome. Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. What about C, reluctant acceptance? You don't think he was reluctant? Yeah, okay, so we're in agreement that biggest and best doesn't make sense with reluctant acceptance. Perfect. So we're going to eliminate it. What about profound relief? Yeah, profound, sort of a big word, so we're going to eliminate profound relief. What about mild disappointment? Does mild disappointment match with our anticipation based on his high school being the biggest and the best? No, but you're right. He did say that the other high school was better. What do we think? What do we do? Exactly. We're going to go with the one that most closely matches our anticipation, and that is answer choice A. Perfect. Okay? So that's how I'll sort of walk them through a question. I'll have them anticipate. I'll have them generate the answers. Students might argue for a wrong answer, and that's fine. If they want to keep it, they can keep it. It's their test. They need to learn. And so what you need to get practicing on, what you need to start practicing, is you need to start practicing when you read these answer choices, don't lead students with intonation or with how you read them. So if I ask students, do we think initial excitement's right? Or do we think that mild disappointment is right? Students are going to know A is the right answer. And they're going to know that because I told them without telling them. So make sure that you're having students read those answer choices and allowing students to guess. If they've eliminated one answer choice, they should guess. If they're on the fence about something, they should leave it. They shouldn't eliminate. They should only eliminate ones that don't match their anticipation at all. All right, if we go to question 11, the author mentions a school offering in lines 13 to 17 to emphasize A, and everyone should be covering their answer choices. All right, so I need someone to anticipate. If we go back to the passage, why might he mention their offerings? What'd you write? Okay, you wrote unequal schools. Totally. What did someone else have? Student number 4. What'd you anticipate? You went back to white collar versus blue collar. Okay, awesome. So white versus blue. Okay. So those are our anticipations. Now we're going to reveal. And what can we eliminate? Looking at our answer choices, which answer choices don't match with what we're doing? Absolutely. E is a big, floofy answer choice that doesn't match up at all with what actually happened. Yeah, A. A didn't happen at all. Neither did C. You're right. So C is not going to be our answer choice. Okay, so you want to eliminate D. You want to keep it. We're split, so we'll keep it. Go with what matches our anticipation best. Which answer does that? And it is B. Perfect. And so that's how we'll walk through all of the questions, and we'll go back and practice with another passage. And it's something that they need to keep practicing. This is something that you need to be really diligent with your students about. You need to make sure that they're covering. You need to make sure they're anticipating every question, every time, and that will help to improve their accuracy, which is our ultimate goal here. Thank you guys so much for giving me your time and attention today, and knock 'em dead this summer. Bye.